Today I want to begin by reading to you a dream that was sent to me by Gordon Patterson. Many of you know Gordon. Gordon has lived in Cambodia for 23 years. He's 20-something years now, maybe 25. He's from Australia, but he's lived in northeast Cambodia for the last 20-some-plus years. And he's working with a number of tribal groups in that area. And anyway, Gordon's been following along with us and actually leading the way in many respects in terms of what's going on globally, in terms of listening to the Lord, moving with the Lord, training a people that he's with there to move with him. And they've seen a number of results in an area that's truly been an area that's been pirated in the past, one of the worst areas in the world in the late 1970s. But anyway, here's what Gordon wrote me about a dream. He says, was just listening to your Reset Diary, Entering Rest, Part 2. And he quotes what I said in that time. When I said what the Lord told me, very soon I'm going to turn things upside down and inside out. Gordon writes, in a similar vein, I had a vivid dream this last Monday morning. In the dream, I was at the base of a hill face, taking some micro measurements of water flow in a small trickle of a stream that was running over rocks. I was calculating what kind of microstructures would be needed to change the flow of the water. All of a sudden, a large crack appeared across the top of the hill face, and I realized the whole side of the hill was about to collapse in a landslide. In an instant, I was somehow transported across the face of the hill just before it collapsed. Someone on the other side of the hill met me and said, quote, in a matter of a few seconds, the whole hydrology and morphology of this hill face will be completely changed. That's where the dream ended. Here's Gordon's conclusion. My efforts to measure and influence the flow of water at the beginning of the dream were rendered totally insignificant and superfluous by the cataclysmic scale of change that was about to take place. Very interesting dream that Gordon had, especially in light of where we are in the book of Exodus in this time where God was preparing his people for their new normal. Now, I've been thinking about this phrase, I'm going to turn things upside down and inside out, and been thinking about that over the last several days. And when Gordon sent me this dream, it caused me to see it even further and to see it different than what I had originally imagined. You see, when God said, I'm going to turn it upside down and inside out, that was talking about the things of the systems of the earth from the vantage point of how those systems are perceived in the earth. In other words, the world system perceives itself as being rightly set up. We've learned to live in it for such a lengthy time, that we tend to see things as they were, as the way things should be. And so when we look at things and the way they've been and what we've become familiar with, what we call our old normal, then it's clear that we perceive of things in our old normal as being right side up and right side out. And so when God says, I'm going to turn things upside down and inside out, then it makes us think, oh my gosh, things are going to not only just be different, but be decisively different and completely unfamiliar. But I think what we have to see in this hour is that God isn't just doing this to change the order of things. He's doing a restoration to restore things back to his design. In other words, his design, what God created, is to be our normal. It was the normal on which the earth was created. But then when man sinned And when the world system began to develop, it turned things upside down and inside out. So what was our normal was really what was upside down. And God's really taking what was upside down, that world system, and He's turning it right side up. And then He's taking what the world system had done to turn His creation inside out. He's putting it outside in. He's reversing it. He's changing it. He's actually bringing back things back to where they should be. Where we have been is the place where things have been distorted, where things have been out of place. We've learned to live and operate in a world completely out of sync with how God created it, which is why so much of our world system is steals, kills, and destroys. If there's two things that would describe what's going on economically around the world right now, is an exaggeration of the injustice and the inequities, the inequality that has evolved over many centuries around the earth. And that's becoming even more so. I saw yesterday that at this time when so many people, we have a record number of people have applied for unemployment, over 36 million people on unemployment now in the United States. At the same time, they were reporting that Jeff Bezos, who's the head of Amazon, very well may become the first trillionaire in the world. We've moved past millionaires and billionaires. We're now moving to a new level of trillionaires, this at the time when there are more people than ever without a job. That's called inequality. It's a part of the injustice of a system that takes value from things and puts them in the hands of a few instead of blessing the whole earth. Well, all of that to say, that's what's upside down. So when we look at God saying He's going to turn things upside down, He's really saying, I'm going to turn things upright, back the way I designed them. And this is the difficult part, because God never separates Himself from His design. Philosophers did years ago. They said that God created the earth and He left it alone, and He's given it to men to just figure out how it works and make it work. But from what I can tell, God has never let go of creation. He is always creator with creation, such that the earth is the Lord's in all it contains. He never passes on ownership of that, though He does have an inheritance of the earth that He gives to sons. He never relinquishes responsibility. He never stops operating over the earth. He lets certain things happen at a time and then rectifies those things at other times. It's completely in His hands. And yet we have to learn how to operate with Him, because He says if we would learn how to operate with Him, then the earth, in our experience of it, our lives would become full. Now, what's interesting in this episode in Exodus today, it's actually out of Exodus chapter 17. It's the second episode of Israel in the wilderness, where they had a need for water. Previously, it was water. Their water they found was bitter, and it needed to be made potable or drinkable. Now, in chapter 17, they're without water in a place where they couldn't find water, and so they needed to find a new source of water. Now, remember what had happened the previous time. God had him throw Moses. He showed Moses a tree, and he threw that tree in the water, and the water became drinkable. In this particular situation, God tells Moses to go and strike a rock, and so that out of this rock, water would begin to come. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's another situation later where God instructed Moses not to strike the rock, but to speak to the rock. And when Moses struck the rock out of anger, that's what caused him to not be able to enter the land of promise with Joshua, though he did enter it later. these episodes are very interesting because what you find is that each episode has some of the same elements, but in each one, God has his people do something slightly different than the way he had done it before. Why would God do that? Why would God tell us something one day and then tell us something different another day? Remember, that's what he did with manna. In manna, he told them for 6 days they were to gather the manna a certain way. They were only to keep a certain amount for their family. It would not last overnight. They weren't to keep it overnight or it would go bad. They were to gather too much or it would go bad. But then on the 6th day, in preparation for the 7th day, they were to gather twice as much. It would keep overnight. And so it was like for 6 days, it was one way. For a 7th day, it was completely different. Isn't that interesting? And then on the first day, it would revert back to the old structure. And it went like this for 40 years. Why would God do something like that? Why wouldn't he make it just all operate the same way? See, this is what philosophers have told us. That the earth has been, whether it's designed or randomly come into being, and everything stays the same all the time. But God doesn't do it that way. Why? Because he's creator and he's always involved with his creation. What God wants us to do is realize that creation is really just a bunch of pieces without him, fragments without him. But with him in the middle of it and us connected to him, everything in creation takes on a whole new level of value than it would have apart from him. God has designed it so that things don't just work without him. There are things that can work, and God's given us the opportunity to discover things. But in that discovery, what he wants us, and he calls us to discover more than anything else, is him. He is the point of the discovery. If we haven't discovered more of him and come into a greater connection with him, then all that we have are the fragments of whatever it is we found. See, that's why when we go through a time like this, and I know for some of you who are struggling or have struggled in the past with the idea of how do I hear God, you know, hearing God isn't about a formula. It's not about how you do it and whether you do it long enough, get enough, and all this. Each time you go through a situation like we're in with the COVID-19, it requires you to connect with God in a way that you've never connected with him before. Things all become new. God's doing things different. We have to listen to him different. We have to let go of our default way and grab a hold of his way. It's his prerogative to say for 6 days you do it this way, but for the 7th day you do it that way. That's his prerogative, and that's the way that he's designed creation to operate. And it always operates with him as he says, because it belongs to him. So when we talk about how we're going to make it in these times when things all look upside down, think of it this way. We're in a time where God's putting things back right. We've learned to live our life without the right kind of gravity. And so now God is letting us learn how to experience creation and all that's around us, experience it with him as our gravity. Yeah, there are things like natural law and so forth, but he becomes the law of it all. And what he wants to do on Monday, while it may change on Tuesday, regardless of what changes, there still is consistently him. So that in the midst of the change, what gives us gravity by which we can stand upright and continue to move in a direction that is useful, what gives us that ability is God himself. And this is why during this time you want to let go of techniques. Let go of the way you do things. Let go of thinking I've got to know this, I've got to know that. If I do this first, this second, this will all work out. It doesn't work that way. God knows how it works. He's the only one. And He's the one that holds the key to it, to how things work. So how things will work for you today and for us today will depend upon how we're connected with our God today. It doesn't mean He works the same way every day. These situations prove He doesn't. He wanted His people to learn in the wilderness what He wants us to learn today in our wilderness. That if we move with Him day by day, things may change dramatically, but He will be the one thing that gives us balance and equilibrium in a time when things look like they're upside down and God's really turning them right side up.